The Kia EV6 is very different from the likes of the e-Niro and the Soul EV, and indeed is very similar to the likes of the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which we previously reviewed on the channel. Now in this review, we'll be comparing it to its sibling, and furthermore seeing how this vehicle, which starts from £41,000, compares to its major rivals. Now, one of the biggest differentiators, at least with the Ioniq 5, is when it comes to its battery, and indeed we're going to talk about driving range. Now, the EV6, at least at the time of filming, comes with a singular 77.4 kilowatt hour battery pack. Singular, by that I mean that there is no option to go for a smaller or indeed a larger battery pack, whereas with the Ioniq 5 or indeed a lot of its competitors, you have the choice to choose. Now, by Kia's claim, you've got around 328 miles on the WLTP cycle. Now, it's worth bearing in mind that is with the heat pump installed. Now, in the GT line and the GT line S, you have the option of adding the heat pump. It comes in at an additional £900, including VAT. Now, the Airline, which is the entry-level EV6, which starts from roughly £41,000, doesn't have the option to have a heat pump installed. So that's worth bearing in mind. Now, the model that we have is the GT line, and it does indeed have the heat pump installed. Now, from our mixed driving test, we attained roughly 240 to 260 miles, which is certainly a respectable score and a smidge better than the likes of the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which attained roughly 230 to 250 miles. Now, by comparison, this means that the EV6 stands pretty much a little bit better than the likes of the entry-level Tesla Model 3, the Polestar 2 with the heat pump, and similarly with the Volvo XC40 Recharge Twin Pro. Now, it does mean that it's not as impressive as the likes of the Kia e-Niro, the Kia Soul EV, or the likes of the VW ID4 without a heat pump installed, because these vehicles attained roughly 260 miles rather than towards the lower end of that spectrum. Now, there is also, of course, the likes of the Tesla Model 3 all-wheel drive or the long-range variants such as the Performance, where we attained roughly 310 miles from a mixed driving test, and similarly the Skoda Enyaq iV attained roughly 300 miles. Suffice to say that the EV6 does well in terms of range, but isn't as good as some of its newer competitors, and one might have expected a little better of range from Kia, given their expertise in the EV sector with the likes of the e-Niro or the Soul EV. Now, unlike a lot of its competitors, the Kia EV6, very much like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, has a variety of different regenerative braking modes that you can customize, and I absolutely love this. Now, right now we're in level 0 mode, and hopefully the GoPro on the side over here will be able to pick that up on the instrument cluster. So I'm just going to release the brake pedal and just start rolling down this hill in Wimbledon, overlooking Wimbledon tennis. Right now I'm on level 0 mode and I'm coasting. I'm actually increasing in speed. I go on level 1, it starts decelerating. Level 2, decelerating a little bit more. Level 3, decelerating even more harshly, but still not coming to a complete standstill. And then we've got the final mode, iPedal mode, and you can see over here, decelerate even more harshly to the point that we can come to a complete standstill. Then I really love iPedal mode because it really takes away the stress when you're commuting in and around the city. But there's also another mode, and that is auto mode. Now, you'd hold down on the right side flappy paddle in order to initiate auto mode. Now, you were able, hopefully, to see that I just kind of accelerated just a little bit there. In other words, I wasn't still at a complete standstill. And that's because in auto mode, in other words, in its strongest regenerative braking mode, it means that you can't come to a complete standstill. However, there's a way of counteracting this. Again, if I'm just going to lift off the accelerator pedal, I start coming to a pretty harsh deceleration, but then I want to come to a complete standstill just before the van in front of me. I just hold down on the left side flappy paddle, and then it initiates the equivalent of iPedal mode and then allows you to stop. Now, what I really love about auto mode is that you can customize it through the infotainment system, whereby you've got the 3 level modes to choose from: strong, medium or low deceleration, and it will remember the last used mode, and therefore each time you step inside the vehicle, at least within auto mode, it means that you don't have to each time set it. Now, on the flip side, iPedal mode, which I really do love when it comes to commuting in and around the city, does not get remembered, and I do feel this is somewhat of a mixed trick from Kia, because In the likes of the Tesla Model 3, which ironically we're just following right now, or the likes of the Polestar 2, you have the option to just enable the toggle through the infotainment system. And alas, that's not the case in the Kia EV6. So therefore, if you really do love driving on iPedal mode like I do, each time you step inside the vehicle, you'll be on level 3, for example, and then you'll have to initiate iPedal mode. Now, aside from regenerative braking, of course, you have the ability to plug in the EV6 to a charge point. Now here, the EV6 has a 220 to 230 kilowatts of input, and therefore means that if you do find a DC rapid charger that has the ability to scale up to that level, in other words, let's say if you find a 350 kilowatt charger, then you'll have the ability to go from 0 to 100% in around 18 minutes. Now, finding these DC rapid chargers is somewhat rare, at least at the time of filming, and as a result, if you're on the motorway, you'll more likely find a 50 kilowatt charger. Now here, it will take around 1 hour and 15 minutes to attain the same level amount of charge, which isn't too bad if you just want to have a small little lunch or coffee break while you're doing a longer distance drive. And as for if you're at home or if you're at a workplace, if you have access to a 3-phase power supply and therefore a appropriate 11 kilowatt charger, then you'll have the ability to utilize the onboard 11 kilowatt charger on the EV6 and therefore go from 0 to 100% in around 7.5 hours. If you were to then go to a regular 7 kilowatt wall box charger, or indeed a public charger, this figure will extend to around 13 hours. If you were to plug it in via a regular 3-pin socket, expect a full charge to take roughly 33 hours. Now, other than charging the EV6, you can use vehicle-to-load technology in order to power an external device. This is available in the GT line trim or above. Indeed, via the included adapter, you can even charge up another electric vehicle, although it's limited to a 3.5 kilowatts of power output. Now, this feature might seem redundant to a lot of individuals. However, the 3-pin socket that's found within the cabin and therefore just underneath the rear seat is quite handy if you're going camping. And here you can plug in a kettle, a hairdryer, or even a full-blown DeLonghi coffee machine, making it quite handy to have your coffee on the go. Now, other than its clever use of technology, how does its performance stack up to its competitors? Well, here the rear-wheel drive model that we have on review has 168 kilowatts of power. That equates to around 226 horsepower, and it means that you'll get around 350 newton meters of readily available torque. We had it tested from 0 to 60 miles an hour in 7.1 seconds, and top speed is rated at 114 miles an hour. Now, if you do want a bit more of a punchy experience, you might want to consider the all-wheel drive variant of the EV6, whereby you can get sub 5 seconds in the more expensive GT line all-wheel drive models, or if you go for the regular, or shall I say the top spec GT line all-wheel drive, that will give you a sub 3.5 seconds 0 to 60 time. Now, straight line speed isn't always the most important factor. Of course, getting away from the light as fast as you can definitely will bring a smile to your face. But what about when it comes to its handling characteristics? Well, here I will say that the suspension setup is a little bit stiffer, which means that when you're going around country roads, the vehicle actually suffers from very minimal body roll. Now, don't get me wrong, it's not comparable to the likes of the Tesla Model 3, Polestar 2, or the class-leading BMW i4, or let's say the Audi e-tron GT or Porsche Taycan, but it's certainly a vehicle, given its size and almost in comparison to other larger size vehicles, certainly impressive. Now, what I will say here is that the Kia e-Niro, on the other hand, does do a better job when it comes to commuting in and around town. And the reason behind that is because that the e-Niro has a softer suspension setup, and therefore means that you won't feel the potholes, anomalies, or speed bumps as much as you would do on the EV6. Now, I can't quite comment about the top spec GT line, which does have an electric suspension setup, so therefore it might be a little bit better in this department, but nevertheless that is a complete different breed of car and also comes in at a different price point too. Now, I should also mention that the rear-wheel drive setup that we have on review does lose its back end when you put your foot down to the metal and you're cornering at speed in the wet. Of course, I don't expect many people to do this, but if you want that extra bit of confidence, you might want want to go for the all-wheel drive model instead. And here I can definitely say that the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which did have an all-wheel drive setup, and therefore the EV6 with an all-wheel drive setup, will definitely give you that extra level of confidence. Now, if you are an enthusiast, you might even want to consider the GT model, because that has a limited slip differential and therefore will give you a little bit more peace of mind when you're going on challenging roads. Now, while the EV6 won't stand out when it comes to straight line speed in comparison to the likes of the e-Niro or the Soul EV, at least when it comes to its rear wheel drive configuration, what it will certainly make your head turn is its exterior design, which we feel is absolutely sublime. At least that is if you go for the GT line or the GT line S or GT models, because they integrate body coloured wheel arches and side skirts. Alas, the Air model, which comes as standard, does not have such inclusions. Now, no matter which trim level you go for, you've got this flared type of front wing design, and the sort of look that you've got thanks to the headlights give it that kind of aggressive flair. Now, as for the sidle profile, the alloy rims that come as standard are 19-inch, and depending on the trim level you go for, you've got 20 and 21-inch rims as well. As for the rear profile, it's still got that futuristic type of look, and that will certainly appeal to a lot of consumers or indeed onlookers, specifically given the taillight design that stretches across from the entire rear profile of the vehicle. What I am not a fan of, however, is the fact of the door handles. Now, the way they operate is very much like the Tesla Model 3, and unlike the Hyundai Ioniq 5, whereby when you unlock it, the handles prop open and makes it a little bit easier to open up and operate the door, it's not quite as intuitive on the EV6, and wish that Kia had really retained the same sort of design as its Hyundai sibling. Now, what really sets itself aside from the Tesla Model 3 is when it comes to its familiar interior design, and that's really thanks to the inclusion of two 12.3-inch curved displays. And here, of course, unlike the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which opts for flat screens, the EV6's infotainment system that's slightly angled towards the driver makes it a little bit easier to interact with. Now, on that note here, the menu system and also the responsiveness of the screen is absolutely faultless, at least in our tested model. And here you do also have Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support, but they're only limited to a wired format only, and alas, you don't have wireless connectivity to these systems, at least not at the time of filming. Now, very much on that point, it is quite a shame that Kia and indeed Hyundai have still not optimized the operating systems on their infotainment system, whereby on Android Auto you have a third of the screen that's completely blacked out and not usable. Now, furthermore, it should be noted that navigation data does not feed into your instrument cluster, nor in the GT Line S or the GT trims in your head-up display. Now, very much like the Ioniq 5, the EV6 has omitted physical controls when it comes to its climate control settings. And while I'm normally not a fan of it, I think the integration that Kia have done over here should be absolutely commended, because by a touch of a button you can flick between your media controls and go to your climate settings. Furthermore, the two physical knobs found on either side of the LCD display allow you to adjust the volume when you're on your media settings, or indeed go between tracks or your files. And when you're on the climate control settings, you can adjust the cabin temperature, be it as a passenger or indeed as a driver. It's a real clever use of technology, and I think this should be really adopted by other manufacturers, because Kia have absolutely nailed it. Now, before moving on the use of technology, I should just point out that Kia have integrated two Type-C ports and a Type-A port by the front of the center console, and you've also got a 12-volt socket to provide additional power, say for example to a dash cam. If you want our best roundup, do check it up down in the description below. There's also two Type-C ports found towards the rear of the cabin, and the ports are found on each of the rear segment of the front seats. Now, in terms of audio system, you have a 6-speaker system as standard in the Air and the GT line. If you go for the GT Line S or indeed the top spec GT trim, you'll have a 14-speaker Meridian audio system. Now, if you want a detailed breakdown of the stock audio system, do check it up on your pod banner down in the description below, or indeed in the pinned comments. What I will say in a nutshell is that the 6-speaker system will definitely suffice for most consumers, but audiophiles might be looking at the superior Meridian audio system if they want to get a heightened audio experience. Now, the EV6's cabin is pretty well insulated from the world around you and therefore will give you lowered cabin noise. However, it isn't as serene as the likes of the Tesla Model 3. Now, very much like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, the EV6 also does suffer from a little bit of rattle that can be heard from the rear of the cabin. Here's a little bit of a snippet as to how it sounds. Now, with that aside, comfort at the front of the cabin is excellent, and that's namely due to the very accommodating and comfortable front seats. Furthermore, headroom and legroom is not an issue. Now, it should be mindful that on all trim levels, they come heated as standard, at least the front seats do, and so does the steering wheel. Now, if you want fully electronically adjustable seats, you'll have to go for the GT line or above, and similarly, if you want a sunroof, you'll have to go for the GT line S. Now, this does bring in a lot of additional light within the cabin, but is no competition to the panoramic glass roofs of the Tesla Model 3 or the Polestar 2. Now, at the rear of the cabin, it's also really spacious, and that's thanks to the Kia EV6 having a relatively long wheelbase. And as a result, it means as someone who's just under 6 foot, I have no problems when it comes to legroom. Headroom is a little bit more limited, specifically for 6'4" or 6'7", but nevertheless, given the fact the amount of legroom you can have, you can kind of hunch down. Also, you do have reclining rear seats, which also makes it a little bit more comfortable for longer distance drives. Now, I do also like the fact that, very much like the Hyundai Ioniq 5, that the Kia EV6 does not have a pointless transmission tunnel, and that's because it's built on a pure EV platform. The same couldn't be said, for example, about the BMW i4, which does have that transmission tunnel and makes it a little more cumbersome for your rear middle occupant. Speaking of which, if you don't have a rear middle occupant, the two rear main occupants can reveal a armrest and also a little compartment storage. This also doubles up very cleverly thanks to a sliding mechanism as cup holders as well. Now, before moving on to storage capacity, I should just also quickly mention that the rear outer seats are heated within the GT line S trim or above, but alas, that's not the case in the entry level trim or indeed the GT line that we have on review. Now, this might seem a little bit trivial to some people, but when it comes to getting in and out of the vehicle, specifically at the rear of the cabin, I did find that the side skirts do protrude a little bit from the design of the vehicle. And as a result means that if you're frequenting the rear of the cabin, so for example, if you have goods or if you have, let's say, a child seat that you're going to be constantly getting in and out, you might find that you will hit your shin on the side skirts and therefore will cause a lot of pain. Just something to be mindful about, and indeed something to look out for if you're trying out the EV6 for the first time. So moving on to storage, at the rear of the cabin, you have got the ability to place a 500ml bottle only on the rear doors, although you can of course not place a bottle here and place, let's say, a small size smartphone. If you have some books or indeed some papers, you can place them towards the rear portion of the front seats. Now, at the front of the cabin, it's actually really impressive. There's no issues whatsoever when it comes to storage, because within the front door bins, you can fit a 500ml bottle alongside a small to medium sized purse and or a wallet. If you want to hide them from prying eyes, you can place them in the large size glove box and also within the center armrest compartment found towards the center console. And then also through the center console, you do have two cup holders, a wireless charging pad, at least if you opt for the right trim level, and towards the bottom of the center console, you've got a large non-slip area as well. Now, my only complaint over here is, in terms of a design standpoint of view, is that the center console almost reminds me of Pride Rock from Lion King, whereby I feel that Simba's going to be presented towards the front of the center console. It might seem a bit silly what I'm trying to say over here, but if you compare it to the likes of the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which really does optimize this space pretty well and even offers you a movable center console, it means that the Kia EV6 just doesn't feel as spacious, at least not at the front of the cabin. So what about when it comes to boot capacity? Well, here you've got a staggering 490 litres of usable space, and if you were to prop down the seats, you've got roughly 1,300 litres. Now, you should be mindful that you've got a 60-40 split only, so no matter which trim level you go for, but thankfully, if you do have a pair of skis, Kia have integrated a ski latch. Now, there is an underfloor compartment storage space, and if you do go for the GT trims, you will find the Meridian subwoofer in this location, and therefore it drops from 490 litres to around 480 litres of usable storage space. Now, no matter which trim level you go for, it's great to see that the retractable boot cover is not only useful, but also can be stowed away from prying eyes in your underfloor compartment storage, and that's thanks to clever use of design thanks to Kia. Now, there is of course a frontal compartment storage, in other words a frunk, whereby you've got 52 litres of usable storage space within the rear-wheel drive models and a roughly 20 litres within the all-wheel drive models, and that's because there's the front electric motor that would reside around there. Now, the only thing to consider about the frunk storage space is the fact that it's not electronically operated, whereby if you want to release the mechanism, you'll have to do it as you would on a regular ICE-based vehicle. Now, as for the tailgate, it is a shame to see a non-electronically operated tailgate fitted as standard on all trim levels. Here you'll have to go for the GT Line S or above. Now, in the model that we have got, the GT line, or for example the entry-level Air line, you just have a manual tailgate. Now, thankfully, it's very easy to operate and very light, and you've got a little handle over here which makes it very easy to close. And for you to open it, there's a button found just above the number plate, and while it might get your hands a little bit dirty, it does open up very easily. And furthermore has that hatchback design, making it extremely practical to load in and out goods from the rear of the vehicle. Now, another area where the GT Line S stands out in comparison to the cheaper trim levels of the EV6 is when it comes to its driver assistance systems. Now, here what you'll find is a fantastic blind spot monitoring system which uses cameras to show you what's on your blind spot, and you've also got front collision assist with junction assist, and furthermore level 2 autonomous driving, all of which are great inclusions. Now, in the GT line, so one notch down, you won't find these features, but you will have a basic blind spot monitoring system. By that I mean it'll give you a little notification on your side view mirrors, and furthermore you'll have rear cross traffic alert, which is always handy when you're in a parking lot. Now, that's not to say that the regular entry-level Air model is actually striven from all features, because actually it's pretty impressive. Here what you'll find is a adaptive cruise control with stop and go technology, speed recognition, in other words a traffic sign recognition system, and also lane positioning assistant with steer assist, which therefore means that you can have a somewhat comfortable experience when you are on the motorway. Ultimately, over here Kia have really added a lot of features as standard within the EV6, and it means that even in the entry-level model you're getting a lot more value for money in comparison to some of its competitors. Now, while the standard features when it comes to driver assistance systems are pretty impressive, it is a little bit disappointing that Kia have excluded front parking sensors on the Air trim, and indeed you're going to have to go for the GT line like we have on review. Now, as standard, all the EV6 models do have a rear view camera and rear parking sensors, which in my opinion are much needed. And the reason I say that is because visibility around the rear view window is quite limited, and as a result when it comes to parking you're definitely going to want to resort to using that camera or indeed the sensors to make sure that you don't hit an obstacle. Now, you can further heighten the experience if you have the money to go for the GT Line S trim or above, because here you'll have high resolution 360-degree cameras like I previously saw on the Hyundai Ioniq 5, and this takes the stress away from curbing your wheels. And furthermore, you have the ability of using the Smart Park Assist, which therefore allows you to do complex parking maneuvers without actually doing any of the hard lifting. And so this brings us on to our verdict. Can we see ourselves actively recommending the Kia EV6? Well, very much like the verdict that was drawn upon for the Hyundai Ioniq 5, we just think it just fails to stand out in comparison to what the Hyundai Group currently offers. The e-Niro and the Kia Soul EV are both excellent inclusions to the market and come in at a much cheaper price tag. Similarly, if boot space isn't of your utmost priority, you might also want to consider the Hyundai Kona Electric. Now, outside of the Hyundai Group, you've then got the very spacious Skoda Enyaq iV, the pretty futuristic feeling VW ID3 and ID4, and then if you want something that's quite performance driven and you want an SUV, you've got the Volvo XC40 Recharge Twin Pro. Then you should of course consider the Tesla Model 3 when it comes to pure range and of course the overall charging infrastructure, and also the Polestar 2 if you want a little bit more of a familiar interior design. then if you've got the budget and you're considering the all-wheel drive variant of the Kia EV6, or indeed, of course, the Hyundai Ioniq 5, then you should also consider the BMW i4, which makes for a fantastic inclusion in the all-electric saloon market. Now, of course, that's just our thoughts and opinions about the EV6 and, of course, of its competitors. So I'd be intrigued to hear your thoughts in a comment section below. If you've liked this independent, detailed and honest review, definitely do drop a like, subscribe and hit that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated and allows us to continue doing such reviews. As such, I've been Chris from TotallyEV and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.